What up, friends? I mean, if you want, and today we're going to be reviewing Billie Eilish's newest album, Hit Me Hard and Soft. This is the third studio album by American singer-songwriter Billie Eilish. Ever since she first broke into the scene with her fantastic debut album in 2019, Billie Eilish has just skyrocketed in success, becoming one of the major pillars of the modern pop sphere. With her unique vocal style and intimate lyrics, alongside great production by her brother Finneas, this tag team duo just continue to dominate 3 albums in. Now for me personally, it wasn't all winners. Despite not being bad, her bloated sophomore album kind of showcased the limits of her sound and style, especially stretched to the length of that project. It felt a bit too unfocused and drawn out a bit too long, so I was kind of wondering on where she and Finneas would go with her next album. However, I'm happy to say that Hit Me Hard and Soft is kind of a return to form for the duo in my eyes. Not only is the album concise and consistent, but she's also expanded her sonic and vocal palette even more, despite some hiccups here and there. Now, despite being a bit more low-key, I do think that Skinny is a pretty strong start for the project overall, as it establishes the intimacy that kind of permeates throughout the record. It's a very introspective song and project overall, and I find that Billie's unique vocal tone really fits this sort of like indie folk singer-songwriter instrumental. That delicate guitar and the billowing strings and harmonies really add some nice somber texture to the track. I find that Billie's lyrics have also gotten quite a bit better since her last 2 albums as well, as she is definitely a bit more concise and poetic about expressing all of the things that she wants to express, like in this song basically talking about how people think that she's happy now that she's like skinny and, you know, showing off her body a little bit more, but in actuality that doesn't really alleviate the sort of self-image issues that she has. You know, being skinny and successful doesn't really solve mental health all that much, does it? The next track, Lunch, is more reminiscent of her debut, which was a pretty good callback. Now, Billie has expressed this lyrical territory before, but now she definitely seems more confident and overt in talking about her sexuality. The dance beat alongside the electric guitar highlights provide a pretty nice segue from the ending of the last song, and I find that her vocals are also much more engaging than we usually see from her here too. The lyrics are very playful and fun, and are pretty fitting about basically talking about being in a sapphic relationship, as Billie has expressed interest in both men and women in the past. Because of this, it also has this sort of attitude that I think sets it apart from a lot of other tracks in her discography. The piano passages here also add this sort of like flirtatious note to this track too, which I think is really fitting, and that sort of like dance club breakdown near the end also make this one really fun and engaging. Like I said before, I'm very happy at how consistent this album sounds. The transitions are also pretty nice, both from a thematic standpoint and just how smooth they are as we go from the previous song into the next one, CHIHIRO. That club breakdown at the end of the previous track translates into this song very well, with its more low-key dance beat alongside these sort of wispy vocals and synths that create a very dreamlike atmosphere. This is very fitting for the lyrics as well, as she's basically taking the main character's story from Miyazaki's Spirited Away and translating it into a tale about longing and basically this relationship kind of fading away. The whole song has a very smooth house vibe to it, and I really like how the drums also pick up during the second half. It also has these spacey synths that come in during this time as well, and I think this instrumental build-up also really expresses how, in the lyrics, Billie is growing in frustration about how she is really into this person, but the other person is just kind of wasting her time. The synergy between the instrumental and the lyrics are pretty good here. Now we get to Birds of a Feather, one of the best songs on the project, I think, as we take that sort of house direction that she was exploring on the previous track, and we add some more natural drums and guitar into it. All of this helped create this very somber song that talks about wanting a love that lasts until death. Her vocals are also by far the best on this one, reaching heights that I just really haven't seen from Billie before, especially when she delivers lines like, "It might not be long, but baby, I'll love you till the day that I die." The vocal cadence on this one really reminds me of singers like Olivia Rodrigo, and it also really reminds me on why I like singers and vocal styles like this. It expressed this sort of rawness and sort of like expressiveness that I feel cleaner singers may be a little bit afraid to explore. It's a great showcase of desperation. I honestly kind of wish she reached these vocal highs more. There's just such a great flow to this one. Now we slow it down a little bit again with the next song, Wildflower. It's an acoustic track, and these ones usually aren't my favorite, but honestly I think this one's pretty good. The vocals really shine here, once again having a very expressive vocal style that really matches lyrics about basically her reminiscing on what she could have done differently in her past relationship. The lyrics on this one overall are very straightforward, but also very poetic in that sense too. The addition of the simple beat and piano, alongside some guitar melody shakeups here as well, make the song actually engaging and interesting to listen to. The way it also builds up into a somewhat lively finish is also pretty captivating. This is totally unintentional, I'm sure, but this whole song really reminds me of the vibes of Japanese singer Hako Yamazaki, which again is totally unintentional, but it's a very big compliment from me, so. Now the second half of the record is a little bit weaker, but it's not bad. The biggest problem I have with The Greatest is that it kind of just sounds like a lesser retread of Wildflower, and the fact that it comes right after Wildflower on the track list really makes this more apparent. It feels not as impactful or unique as it could be as well. The instrumental overall feels more limp and barren compared to that of the song that came before it, and while this song definitely does have more of an explosive finish than Wildflower did, I almost feel like it kind of loses the grounded intimacy that made Wildflower so good. Still, Billie's vocals are good, and the drums and strings that come in during that outro are still very satisfying to listen to. L'amour de ma vie is basically CHIHIRO's snarky cousin. It features a more quirky pop beat alongside these plucky guitar notes alongside Billie's more carefree vocals. It's almost like she's examining this relationship now that she's moved on, and she's realizing that she shouldn't feel bad about the other person not being into her. They may have gotten the last laugh, but it's not like Billie did anything wrong, and I feel like this beat sort of is reminiscent of Billie Bossa Nova, and in that sense it has this sort of like sarcastic and carefree aesthetic to it. The attitude of this track is super fun. She's basically getting the last laugh here, you know? Like, she's going to take the high road and move on, but damn, is she sure gonna let you know that she's doing it. This is of course before we get into the second half of the track, which transitions into this sort of like 80s synth pop, almost like hyper pop sounds at times. Now, while I do like this song overall, I don't really know how well this second half fits both the track and the album as a whole. It honestly feels a bit unnecessary. I feel like this would have been more fitting on a different project that has this sort of sound all the way through it, because as it stands right now, the first half is way more in line with the overall sound and aesthetic of the album. The Diner is probably going to be the most divisive song on this project, but man, I love this one. It's honestly one of my favorites on the project. Like, this is the O Green world of Billie's discography. Yes, I have to throw a Gorillaz reference in here, but like, it's just so weird and quirky, and it fits Billie's aesthetic perfectly. Those off-kilter synths that sound like they're coming from a fucking cackling witch just fit the vibe perfectly, and it also really fits the lyrical narrative being expressed here. Basically, the song is from the perspective of a stalker, and Billie has had experiences with this sort of thing in the past. All of this gives off a very sadistic vibe to the song. The bass is heavy and bold, and those like clarinet samples, or whatever they are so like dark and foreboding. It just creates a really unique atmosphere that is very reminiscent of her debut project, and I think it's a very welcome addition on this track. I'd honestly love to hear a whole album full of stuff like this sort of like more experimental, dark wave, electronic direction. It's just so good. The next track, Bittersweet, is probably the weakest on the album for me personally. The opening synth is pretty unique, sure, but overall the main melody is just kind of there. The beat also is just not really doing anything for me, and overall it just kind of sounds like a more basic version of CHIHIRO. While I do appreciate the sort of lyrical callback to L'amour de ma vie, it just sounds like it doesn't really know what it wants to be, which is kind of ironically fitting because that's kind of what the song that it's taking that lyrical inspiration from ended up doing. It's not terrible or anything, but this one strikes me as being the most filler out of everything on here. It almost sounds like an unnecessarily expanded intermission. Finally, we get to Blue, the last song on the record, and I do think it sends us off pretty well. With lyrical callbacks to pretty much every song on the project, we get Billie's very airy and ethereal vocals over a beat that is light yet punchy at the same time. That bass also makes for a pretty powerful backdrop for Billie to just croon over. Her vocal style on this one is just really satisfying overall. This is another two-part song, with the first half being more low-key before transitioning into this sort of like power ballad in the second half, but I think both the transition and the second half of the song are way more fitting and seamlessly done compared to songs like L'amour de ma vie. The verse about her ex-lover's problematic childhood and lines like, "You were born reaching for your mother's hands, victim of your father's plans to rule the world, too afraid to step outside, paranoid and petrified of what you've heard," is fantastic and just showcases how much she's grown as a lyricist. The electronic aspects of the second half also give off this unsettling atmosphere that I think really encapsulates kind of growing up in a broken home, and I think it provides a pretty powerful backdrop to the closing message of the song. It's very somber and well established, and like I said, I think it really drives home the fact that when we take someone as our partner, we take their entire history with us too. Overall, this is a very solid outing and definitely a return to form for Billie and Finneas. I loved how much more concise this album is compared to her previous one, Happier Than Ever, alongside refining a lot of the sounds that she was experimenting with on both of her previous albums. I would say this is actually some of Billie's strongest in terms of vocals and lyrics, and I think it really expresses how much she's basically come into her own here. However, as much as I did like a lot of the instrumental and production choices on here, it definitely felt a bit safe, especially compared to something like her debut album. It's definitely still very solid and well produced, but it doesn't have that gritty darkness that permeated throughout her debut record that I really liked. Granted, we do see some of that resurface again on tracks like Lunch and The Diner, which is great, but I wish we got a bit more of that experimental aspect of the record, and maybe also deviated a little bit away from the typical pop song structures here as well. Because of all this, I end up liking this album about the same as her debut. She definitely has grown lyrically and vocally, but the rugged and sort of up-and-coming experimental vibe of her first album were definitely among the sounds that I prefer in her discography. They definitely created a more unique image for her compared to the stuff that she and Finneas are doing nowadays. However, in spite of all that, I am feeling a light 8 on this newest album by Billie Eilish. Of course, we do still have to talk about album covers on this show, and this album cover, it's okay, you know? It does definitely represent the sort of vibe and themes of the album, with her basically falling in the water. It has these dark and deep blues in the color scheme. I just think the imagery is kind of played out for this sort of vibe and aesthetic. I definitely prefer album covers that are a bit more design oriented, a bit more minimalist, I suppose, so already this isn't really my favorite style of cover, but I think we've just seen imagery like this done a lot. You know, maybe if that background was just this shade of blue and it was her falling without the door at the top and the water effects and stuff like that, that would have been a bit more impactful. But as it stands right now, it's okay, it fits the vibe, it's just not very unique. But of course, those are just my thoughts on this newest album by Billie Eilish. What did you guys think? Do you definitely think this is also a return to form for her, kind of refining and combining sounds that she's explored in the past? Or are you a bit more inclined on the sounds that she was exploring previously? Let me know. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell if you want to hit me. Don't do that. Ring the bell, though. But until the next one, farewell.